post MDI, I worked with the Times, like TOI, and I was leading direct marketing for them across the country, and implementing SAP. So it was like a semi-marketing, semi-tech kind of a role. Then there was this thing which was happening in their internet company, which was an auto portal. They wanted to do a car and bike portal. So I joined there and built it along with a couple of other key people right from scratch. It was called zigwheels.com. We became India's #1 auto portal in 2010. So after about 3 years of work, none of us had equity. It was early for that kind of a thing in India. So 2011, I moved on and started a fashion brand called Done by None. That's DONEBYNONE, and me and two other partners. And then we put in our own money, started building it. Jan 2012, we raised venture funding of about $2 million, scaled that venture. It was exciting and it was also tough in certain ways. And 2015, I started what my team and I are doing now. So last 3-4 years, we've only been working on a single scope, which is to work with the retail brands on technology, on performance marketing, on analytics, to help them maximize direct-to-consumer revenue. Hardcore direct-to-consumer e-commerce is when you really own the consumer, which is when you're selling from your own website. But it's also used in a slightly broader sense to include your Amazon sales. E-commerce can be taken to be, again, a larger thing than just retail, but we're just going to be talking about retail today. Direct to consumer is a great channel. You control the box, you control the communication, you get superb insights from your consumer. You can scale fast. Those real world constraints are fewer. Scaling revenue is expensive, and it's uber competitive, and so that's the area that we want to focus on. But in essence, it's the channel when you know who your consumer is. It's almost like you're sitting at a bakery and you're the bakery chef, and you know every customer who walks in, where he's coming from or she's coming from. You can listen in on conversations. You know what consumers are liking, not liking. You can, if you've got a new product, they can try it out. Pre-industrial revolution, all businesses used to work like this. Like you knew every customer. And it's only post-industrial evolution that you had like these really large warehouses where you're doing a lot of bulk manufacturing. And then you've got 4-5 steps between you and the consumer. But with tech, and with the internet and everything, that can actually have a direct consumer relationship again. Large retail also has taken onto the channel very seriously. A lot of CEOs post-COVID have got like this mandate from their board saying that I want revenue to come from your own web store. But the issue with retail is, if you look at how offline retail has grown, it's always been about taking good calls, where to open the next store, what should be the product range. So it's been a very centralized operation. People who were good in that model are the ones at the top right now. CEOs, the business heads, the merchandising heads, and the marketing heads. Today's market is different, and how direct to consumer plays out is totally different. On the internet, there's no catchment area. You do small things, you learn. The lower the cost of your iterations, the faster the speed of your iterations, and the richer the learning from your iterations, the better you will be on the internet. So it's a very different kind of a playing field, and that's why I'm saying it's the elephant in the room today for most brands. Offline retail, what happens is, if I've got a chain of 15 stores, and let's say I've got the right catchment areas, then within that catchment area, I'm either number 1, number 2, or number 3. In online, what happens is that everybody's playing for the same market. A girl sitting in Manipur is being bombarded by Amazon, by international brands, and also by some startup from Bangalore, and also by Aditya Birla's online thing or whatever. It's a kind of a market where you have giants and pygmies, like men or humans get eaten out. So it's really important to define a space that you're going to play in and then dominate that space. That's how the nature of the beast is. There's no Facebook number 2. You have to do a WhatsApp to challenge Facebook. You have to do an Instagram, but there's no Facebook number 2 who's doing similar things as Facebook and still has market share. Flywheels are a big metal wheel which takes some time to get started and to get to speed, but once it's at speed, it just goes on its own. So you have to do very little to keep it going. So that's what most business owners want to do, right? They want to get a flywheel started, and then they want the flywheel to go on with very little effort. So if I was to look at a flywheel of brand growth in online in D2C, there's two different cycles. So there's better product range, better sourcing, and therefore better customer experience, and therefore more buyers, and more buyers, and you have stronger minimums, you have more purchasing power as a brand, so you can do better sourcing, which gets to a better product range. So on one hand, it's your product range, which is uh, creating this virtuous cycle, and on the other hand, there's as you scale, you get a lower fixed cost structure, because in online, even if you're spending 1 crore a month, or you're spending 10 lakhs a month, you still need just one or two people to manage that spending. So your fixed cost structure as a percentage of total reduces significantly. It's not like you have to open physical stores and everywhere you need a store manager. So and therefore you've got ability to offer better price, service, or better quality in your products, and that leads to better customer experience. Sort of a winner take all game with online within a space that you're operating in. So therefore there and this is why it's a winner take all game, because somebody who's got more buyers can have a lower fixed cost structure, can have better sourcing, and that further leads to better customer experience, more loyalty, more buyers, etc. We internally track like how the market's moving, and of course we're not a research company, but we look at different studies done by different people, then we aggregate that information. So I just want to give you a sense of how we think the landscape looks like, because like this is again something which you can't really find much in the public domain. So these are like number of web stores in the world, over 1.5 million. This is the average annual revenue in dollars, in thousands of dollars. So this is like $5,000, $500,000, and this is like the multiple of revenue. So this is the top guys, including the Amazons of the world, are folks we call dominators. They just have so much capital, so much such an army of engineers, unimaginable amount of data, and then there's leaders which also have fair access to technology, or if they've got a great offline network within a certain geography. And then there's climbers. This is the next 100,000 brands, and on online stores or e-commerce stores. And then there's starters, which is a lot of those brands on Shopify, which are seriously doing what they can. A lot of startups are in this zone. I wouldn't take the dominants very seriously. That's just somebody's got a store, but they're not really running it like a business. But if you look at this, like you look at climbers, this is where you can see that the uneven access to advanced technology, to capital, to data, to expertise shows in the numbers. So essentially, a climber is 20x smaller than the leader. On the consumer, just wanted to talk about things which I felt are fundamental and things which also connect the past to the future. Traditionally, marketing had three moments of truth. Stimulus was typically, I'm going to buy media on TV and newspaper, and I'll make big ads. That's stimulus. And then the first moment of truth will be when they reach the store, and either it's their local mom and pop grocery wala, or is it or it's like an organized retailer. So that's the first moment of truth, when you see it on the shelf. So the idea was that if you're present in the stimulus and you're not there at the store, the thing won't take off. And then the second moment of truth is the person bought it, took it home. Yes, and then when they get home, they have they actually experience the product. And it's said that your shirts are going to get really white, and then I used it, and then did that really happen? So that's the second moment of truth. This is how for many decades the cycle's been like this. And then what happened is, with the internet coming up, and this started happening in mid 2000s itself, that we had this significant zero moment of truth. For example, when I was doing zigwheels.com, we had this research which said 80% of car buyers research online. That a person researches the product before they even get to the shelf, and they're going to see reviews, they're going to see they're going to see videos, or what other people, or what influencers are saying and all that. So that's your zero moment of truth which got introduced. This is internet. With mobile, what happened is that this further broke up into micro moments, which now span across the whole cycle. So micro moments are happening pre-stimulus, post-stimulus, pre-second moment of truth, pre-purchase, post-purchase, right? And after I purchase a product, I also find out more about it. Then I share it on a blog, then somebody comments, and then there's an innovative idea somebody has, and you can also do this with such and such product. You can put your mints inside your Pepsi and have it blow up, whatever. So there's multiple kinds of discovery as well happening, advocacy happening, or even on the negative side, there's somebody who will come and say, okay, Nike's getting their or Reebok's getting their shoes made in these sweatshops in Malaysia, and this is what the video looks like. So those are all those are moments which are distributed across. Whenever we're building a brand up, or whenever we are working with a brand to create more loyalty or reach or revenue for them, we differentiate an audience called followers from an audience called believers. So the idea of believers is that these are people who are actually living the brand. They're not just believers in the brand, they're believers in the ideas which have given birth to the brand. The brands draw from believers. And ideally in today's world, your first audience should be believers. Like when I was building Done by None, one of the decisions we took very early on was to spend our entire budget on 23 to 26-year-old females in Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore. So the initial fans, the initial buyers, everybody was just that specific segment, because that's the state of mind we wanted to capture. We wanted to be relevant for that state of mind, not just for that little niche audience, but for that state of mind. So we said, okay, the first 3 months, we're going to put all budgets just in this audience, and we'll see which products work. The feedback we got from our audience with actual revenue, with actual dollars, so real retail feedback, was that if you present your products well, if you set the mood right in online, you can actually sell well, and you have loyalty, you have repeat purchase, you have referrals. When you get your believers right, you get your followers naturally. A lot of followers are people who would want to be like a believer, but they can't do it. So they're going to buy a brand that they're talking about, put in very, very simple or basic words. They're much larger in number, and they want the brand to strengthen their self-expression. And believers own a brand because they believe in the values of the brand. So it's important to get your believers right, to have at least your initial mutations should be shaped by believers.
For Horlicks, which is aimed at kids anywhere in the age group 5 to let's say 16, right? And there will be some adult usage and so on and so forth, which is all later. The core TG on the Blue Horlicks brand is typically male, female, age 10 to 12, right? Now 10 to 12 is the age which anybody before 10 to 12 is going to ape. So my core TG is the one that I'm aiming all my advertisements at, and this is their behavior, the non-core TG will kind of follow.
I think there will always be an overlap in these two things, core TG, non-core TG versus believers, followers. So both the perspectives will overlap definitely, but I'm going to tell you how I see them to be fundamentally different. See, typically your core TG comes from a mindset of consumption. What will be my biggest or my most loyal consuming audience, right? If you look at the word consumer, somebody who's simply consuming, I don't think that's the case anymore. When you talk about believers, you're talking about people who actually live the values that Horlicks is about: nutrition, being active, growth. Let's say that these are the values it's based on. So it's people who live that life. So it's people who really have nutrition as an important part of their life, will not just be thinking about Horlicks as it is today, but they'll be thinking about, why can't Horlicks have more micronutrients? Why can't it be in a form that I can consume anywhere, like on the go? So it's not just about what will get the brand the maximum consumption today, but it also tells the brand what will keep me relevant 5 years from now, when my audiences have totally shifted. So the brand is still true to its core.
Videsh, there was a question from Devika long time back. I don't know if this is the right time to take that question, but the question was around that she's into ceramic tableware, and it's a product that sells very highly on touch and feel. How do you get that right on e-commerce in terms of, say, moments of truth?
Ceramic tableware is a touch and feel thing, but it's also a very visual category. And it's also a category where you don't want to go out in the market looking for that piece. Like, we work with Good Earth, and they sell expensive ceramic tableware, right? And I've seen people internationally order it and everything. So and many other brands as well. You see, what happens is, if I like a design, if I like a color, if I like a shape, if I like the way it's done, it's almost like handmade stuff. And okay, yeah, this is, I'm not going to get this anywhere else, so I need to buy it from them. So I think it's a very visual category, and I think it's also something which you don't expect to find the same design elsewhere. It's design led. So I think you can definitely generate demand online. Fulfilling it within the costs that you have is can be a challenge. If you can generate significant demand, and if you can keep your average order value slightly on a healthy side, I think you'd be able to eat those shipping costs, eat those acquisition costs, and you could make it.
Thank you.
Avani here has a question. She says, with ZMOT coming in, has the importance of packaging reduced?
So in online retail, what happens is that the strongest moment of truth in the entire consumer cycle is the moment when she opens the box. Because you've ordered something, you've paid for it, you made a selection, you've waited for 2 days or whatever amount of time. And then when you open the box is where you can actually feel it, you can taste it, you can dig your teeth into it, sort of a thing. Specifically for packaging, I think the importance is only is as higher, probably higher right now. Most of the other things have moved towards online, and these have become virtual. This is the one physical experience which the brand has strong influence on. Following your thought, I think there could be other areas or other moments which have become less important. For example, seeing it on a local shelf. You could be selling Teslas in India without a showroom, or you could be selling Apple to people who've not even been to an Apple showroom. So idea to execution is the stage where you're still thinking about your idea. You want to get it up, and you're going to go live on a certain date. You haven't shot all your products. You haven't done final pricing. You haven't decided which geographies you want to cover or focus on, etc. So it's the stage where you want to go live and you want to start shipping out your first orders. So of course, table stakes today for D2C e-commerce for your own website is to have a feature-rich, reliable, fast website. And then listing presence on marketplaces with search optimization already done, like keywords put in, the basic terms and everything, the phrases and all put in, with some amount of research already done is essential. Differentiators at this stage are going to be UX and design strategy. So if you're doing your own website, then it's important to have the right user experience. So if I'm selling, for example, let's take the example Devika talked about. So if you're selling ceramic ware, then you need to place it in context. You can't just do white background photos and put it up there. You've got to put it in context. People need to see it on a table. There's a nice flower pot. There's some sunlight coming in, some beautiful curtains on a table, and then you've got your ceramic ware. It's shining. It's beautiful. It's really pretty, lovely. Right from the point where the consumer discovers you, which is your ads, to the point where they actually come to the site, they go into your product, zoom in, and to the point where the physical product reaches them, the whole user experience from end to end. Having that right does make a big difference. And then things like A+ content inside your marketplaces, getting the permission for that, etc. And I feel a very strategic advantage at this stage is a razor sharp understanding of a consumer, which I've seen personally. I like, in my experience, a lot of startups, they have a lot of they may have a good understanding of online and all that, and but I've seen that the consumer understanding is the part that they struggle with, because a lot of these offline brands or these stores which have been in existence for a long time, or brands which have been in existence for a long time, they've done a lot of experiments with pricing, with the product ranges, and they've realized what works and what doesn't work. So that experience, that real world experience, does make a big difference. Plus, you could also be a person doing a brand for the first time, but you just understand the TG super well. Like, you may be a gamer building a gaming company, and you just know that audience really well. You know what they like and what they'll not like. So I think that's a strategic advantage at the first stage. And execution to scale is like, you've got your orders going, and now you want to scale to a point where you reached a sweet spot, a float, or significant scale or at a point where you can stay in the game as long as you want to. So executing at scale, cash flow and funds for scaling are essential. I got into internet thinking this is an intelligence intensive industry and not a capital intensive industry. So, and it is to an extent. You have a lot of something called permissionless leverage that you can build. But you still need cash flow and funds for scaling your brand, and you need an effective supply chain. That's also one place where I've seen a lot of new brands struggle. Intelligent ad distribution is super important. It's a key differentiator. A lot of folks in retail don't really understand the whole advertising, like I said, the whole channel distribution, and it's important to allocate the right budget between channels and between products and between different stages of the consumer's journey. So like top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, bottom of the funnel, marketplaces, Facebook, Google, and this category, that category, this product, that product. So all these distributions, being able to do it intelligently, super important to scale, because each of these cross sections is changing every day, and it changes every fortnight because of market factors. And until you've got really intelligence happening there, any strategy you make will become redundant within weeks, if not months. Within months, if not weeks. And the other thing which is important is having the optimal average order value, like Devika, like I mentioned in your case, and a healthy acquisition cost. Strategic advantages would be ability to do price and margin optimization. Price and margin optimization is about brands being able to track the price points of competition in their domain. So like being able to track the price of other competitors on Amazon, for example, being able to know when your direct competition or other sites or the brands that your customers buy, when being able to know when those brands are going to go on discount or if they're on discount today, and being able to take a conscious call, proactive or a timely call on how do you want to respond to the way competition is moving. And also, if you're in a business which has like perishable or semi-perishable inventory, for example like food or fashion, then you also take into account when your product's going to be, when do you need to do your markdowns, and so being able to manage pricing and margin in an intelligent way is a super strategic advantage, and that's actually a large part of your business. Being able to do things being able to see which products of yours are moving any which way and they don't need as much advertising, and which products need advertising to move, and in which products do you have enough margin. So those kind of that kind of information, having access to that kind of information and being able to use that information effectively for your markdown strategy, for your promotion strategy, is a strategic advantage. By go-to-market, I mean here, I'm not just talking about pre-launch or right after launch. I'm talking about go-to-market from a point of view of that, my initial customers will come in buying these kind of products from me, and then I'll introduce that range, and then these people will also want to purchase that from me because they've experienced the brand. And also, like, at what point do I start getting in influencers? At what point do I start getting in do I start a referral thing? At what point do I start a loyalty program? So that strategy, if you get that right, it can be a real strategic advantage. Best in breed strengths around data, because price and margin optimization, intelligent ad budget distribution cannot happen without data. It's increasingly large amount of data is getting generated at every touch point, and it's increasingly there's more number of touch points. It's extremely complex now. If you can be best in breed around data within your competition, within your domain, then that's what will differentiate boys and men in the long term. And from scale to end game is about, okay, so I want to really build value here, or I want this to be a business which I scale to so and so, and then I get some funding in, I take my exit. And or end game could be that I want the business to keep running and I want to have spend just 2 hours a day and have everything done so I can either expand into more categories or start something new, or live life in a lifestyle that I want. So whatever your end game is. So as we go from scale to end game, process automation is a basic. Process definition first and then automation is a basic. Full development of the product range is essential. Differentiators are top of mind recall, something we all understand. Are people are people searching with your product or your brand on Google, on marketplaces, and within your category searches on marketplaces, for example, are you showing up on the top 10 or whatever? So top of mind recall is super important, and recall in the general sense also, do people actually think of the brand when they think of the category? Think of your brand when you think of the category. Inventory velocity becomes very, very important. One of the things which growth, your spends on marketing. In retail, you spend either on marketing, in D2C retail, either on marketing or on inventory. Those are the two big spends typically, and will always be. So the more money which is stuck in inventory, the lesser money you have to spend on marketing, right? And that will either slow down your growth or not allow you to stay competitive as the competition increases. And the competition is increasing every day and will continue to increase for quite a few years. So being able to turn your inventory faster, having a stronger or a faster inventory velocity, or if I was to put it in a metric, having a higher sales to inventory ratio, sales value to inventory value ratio is critical, is important. It's a strong differentiator. And healthy CLV. So your customer lifetime value, how much a customer buys from you over their lifetime, is also having that a healthy customer lifetime value is essential to reaching your end game. You can neither have profitability nor valuation if you don't have this one right. Strategic advantages which go beyond the differentiators or the critical success factor that everybody must work towards. These are strategic ones, and these are on-ground buzz and loyalty. So on-ground buzz means not just people sharing on social media. That's part of it, but on-ground buzz also means that when people talk to each other, like, are they actually talking about it? Is it becoming a conversation when people aggregate, whether online or offline? But it's not like a virtual campaign that you pay for. You create a Twitter handle and you pay some ad dollars and you get that going. No, we're talking about authentic, ground up sort of buzz happening, where people are saying, hey, do you know about that product? And yeah, I tried it and my friend bought it the other day, and my kid was saying this or whatever. So people actually talking about the product uninitiated, and therefore, and of course, loyalty is very close to that, and non-replicable product offerings, because distribution is increasingly replicable, and product offerings are still an area where moats are easier to achieve. In imitation jewelry, you would not have the average order value. Typically, it's hard to get to an average order value. You can actually bear acquisition costs of your own platform. So if you're doing your own platform, on a Shopify, for example, Shopify is a good place to start your journey. And so Shopify, if you set up a Shopify store, for your imitation jewelry, you may not be able to get the acquisition cost at a level where it's very viable. So you'll have to do marketplaces for that reason. For your semi-precious jewelry, you're better off focusing on your own platform. You can still put it up on Amazon, etc. So in semi-precious jewelry, having your own web store is a good idea, because people want to know who you are, and they need to see why I should pay such a premium for it. They want to see beautiful photographs. They want to see some stories around it, some consumer feedback, who made it. Essentially, a more brand-driven sale works better for semi-precious and products which are strongly related with the identity, or where trust is involved, or where there's a very high value involved. People need a brand-driven sale. And some products are just pick up and go. I'm making a basket on Amazon already. I don't mind putting another product in, and there's no additional friction to it. My understanding is that you need to do like a mix of both in such a manner where you're more focused on imitation jewelry on your marketplaces and more focused on your semi-precious on your own web store.
For low-cost fashion jewelry, Amazon, you really have no dearth of options. In that huge sea of competition, how do you sort of differentiate yourself and get that demand? While, of course, Amazon as a platform will ensure you have a certain demand, but how do you sort of make a mark there? Is there something specific, or do you have to partner with Amazon in a bit better way?
Absolutely, very good question. It is a challenge. I don't think I have a complete answer on this, but it is a challenge. You can differentiate yourself by creating really beautiful ads for your most effective pieces, like things which you know that will draw people in. So doing ads with those visuals and then spending a bit on those ads to get people onto your catalog on Amazon or on your own website. I think that kind of clutter breaking creatives is what you need in a category like yours. And fortunately or unfortunately, you will need to, if your price points are around 500, you will need to be on Amazon. And the positive side is that it's not such a strong brand driven sale. Like I don't care which brand I'm buying from. I just want to sell. I just want to pick up a nice piece. So so you don't have to build that whole background about the brand and all that. Just have decent reviews. Try A+ content if you can do it. You know, but most importantly, have the right people to discover your product range. One of the experiments you can do: don't show prices on your ad. Show really some of your beautiful products. Get people into the catalog. I've seen that people, when they like a particular product from a brand and they come to the entire brand catalog, they end up buying something else because they feel it's a nice brand. I want to have a piece of it, and then they end up buying something else. So, so that's also one of the things you can try in a very cluttered marketplace. That sort of helps because you need to get people to see only your catalog and then get them in that mood to buy from it.
Perfect. Thanks. Sounds great.
My question was specifically for a new brand. We are trying to build with D2C only. And now the first question which comes to mind after with what we've seen, we are hearing from you, is how do we decide on which consumer segment to go? Where do I try to build my believers? What product do I build according to it? Any comments on that?
Excellent. No, good. So Karan, first thing is, I think these are great questions. I think having the right questions is super important in the beginning, because as you go along, your available investments reduce or your flexibility in the business reduces and your learning increases. So the problem with most startups is, it's a real issue. Is that you learn a lot, but you learn too late. So I think those are you're talking about the right questions. We'll have to talk about your category a little and your product a little before I can say anything around it.
We are trying right now with, let's say, apparel and specifically kids.
Kids apparel, got that. And what kind of kids apparel is this?
As in, we are quite open on it right now. I'm not specifying a single category.
Okay. So I think the first thing is to get sharper about your categories. That's definitely something you need to do. And second is you need to get a little more sharper on your audience or the premiumness of your offering. For example, you could do a one Friday kind of a thing, which is more premium, more international, global kind of positioning, and a strong mix of online, offline. Or you could do Ginny and Johnny, or like something which is more which is broader, like is more affordable, more wide. Or you could do something like a Toons, which is saying that, okay, I'm targeting the mother, and kids clothing is my way in, but I'm going to sell a lot more to her because she trusts me. And typically young mothers are very busy people. They've got careers to handle, they've got kids, and they've got so many commitments. So it's a good entry point, and they only want to buy from somebody they trust. So that's a good entry point. So I think getting sharp about your offering is absolutely number one thing, and then you can start defining other things around it as well.
Let's say I'm targeting more like Ginny and John. I am a little open in terms of what products I'm offering. I am not going for a premium segment.
In that case, it's you're playing on price. So what sourcing strengths do you have? Like, one of the things which I learned in doing my own business, you should only get into a business in which you have an unfair advantage. So do you have an unfair advantage in affordable kids wear?
No, no.
But let's say you were at a stage where you'd already started it, right? And you wanted to take it somewhere already, because I think some people in the audience would be at that stage as well. And so if I was in that kind of a position, if I was in your position, I would really think of an unfair advantage first. And if I wasn't, if I was I was a little further down the line, I would probably look at a market which is underserviced, where certain designs, for example, a tier 3 market may not have the kind of designs that a Delhi market has for kids, and maybe I could just focus my entire budgets there. Say, okay, Northeast India is a market which doesn't have great kids clothing. It's underserviced, it's under penetrated, and I'll just have a dark store in a Guwahati or something. And when people order, I'll ship from Guwahati, so they'll get the order much faster than when they order from Delhi or Bombay.
I have been into handcrafted and curated ceramic tableware, and I just want to know, okay, I've been doing it. I've been trying to find producers. I've been trying to set up a production house and everything. At what point, with the objective of scaling up, does one get a signal that, hey, this is the tipping point and I need to change something, either strategy or scale up more or increase my inventory or my designs or whatever? And what is that? How do you get that feel of the thing? At what point?
I think one is you need to have a very clear float, like a number for your float revenue. If I'm doing so much revenue, I can pay my costs of this, I can pay my cost, I can sustain, and at this revenue, I can keep going for 2 years without feeling that I'm drowning, right? Even if things go in the market, things go a little up and down, I'll be able to take it. So having that number will come from your financials, of course. Once you have that number, and you have consistent purchases happening on certain categories and products, is the right time to sort of, let's say 30 to 40% of your sale is absolutely predictable.
I get.
Let's say you might say that when I'm doing 20 or 30 lakhs a month, then I know that I'm ready then I'm at my float revenue. And उसके बाद में you know that मेरी 30-40% sale तो absolutely predictable है, और एक 20-30% थोड़ा बहुत ऊपर नीचे होती है, and that's also semi predictable. That's that you need to supply, like, go next step on the supply chain.
Okay, that was quite helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Cool. Any more questions, anybody, before we close the session? Vijay, do you want to leave your contact details at the end, like in a slide or something? And absolutely. I will anyways email people.
What I'll do is I'll just mail out the presentation. Sorry, if you can do that, and I'll put in my contact details. So you can.
Super. I think this is it. Vijay, any final words before we close the session?
No, it was a great experience for me as well. I enjoyed this, being with you guys and actually doing the session. And I loved the questions. I think they were really hardcore questions of people who on the field doing stuff. And I personally have been through this journey a few times. I know it's not easy, but I personally feel that going independent, being an entrepreneur is, I feel it adds to the fabric of the world we live in. It makes the fabric stronger, and I really mean that. And personally, I feel that if you look at how the world is moving, there's a lot more centralization of control, power, money, which naturally is happening because of various effects of the technology and other stuff. And I feel that staying independent, doing your own thing is probably, it's not necessarily going to be more rewarding, but or it could be in certain ways, it would be certain ways it may not be. But I can guarantee you that you'll learn and grow as a human being much faster, and I think things which really matter, you will find along the way. So thanks for being here, and thanks for all your questions, and thanks for doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much. Thanks everybody. We'll be in touch. Please do give us feedback. You have my email address. Please do let me know how we can do this better from the next time on. Thank you. Have a great evening. Have a happy Holi.
Bye, folks. Take care. Bye.